In Sitio San Pablo lived Mang Rado, a farmer whose skin had been carved by the sun and whose hands had been hardened by soil. And every day he carried the weight of earning a living for his family. Even though life was difficult, the determination in his eyes never faded. He lived in a small nipa hut with his wife, Aling Petra, the emotional pillar of their home, and their children, Nico and Lira, who remained cheerful despite sometimes lacking enough food. Their life was not luxurious, but they were rich in love. Every morning, before the sun even rose, Mang Rado would head out with his old plow to start planting rice on land that was not even his. The land was only lent to him by the owner, and only a portion of the harvest went to their pockets. At noon, he would eat rice with salt, or sometimes leftovers and boiled sweet potato leaves, but it was enough to keep him going for the rest of the day. He never complained, because for him, every breath and every sunrise was another chance to fight for his family's future. One afternoon, exhausted from the fields, he decided to pass by Aling Indai's store, known for her loud voice but golden heart when dealing with people who paid honestly. He carried a small pouch filled with coins he had gathered from the corners of their home and the pockets of old pants. "So, Rado, rice again?" asked Aling Indai with a raised eyebrow but a gentle smile. Mang Rado nodded and could barely meet her eyes because he felt embarrassed to borrow once more. Without hesitation, she handed him half a sack of rice and softly said, "Just pay little by little again. I don't rush people who keep their word." Mang Rado's face brightened, and he thanked her wholeheartedly. What Aling Indai did not know was that Mang Rado had been secretly saving the excess coins, placing them in a jar he called installment for the future. For him, it symbolized his promise that one day they would no longer need to borrow rice. Every night, when the children were asleep, he would quietly look at the jar and imagine the day he wouldn't have to stretch coins that seemed to vanish before they could multiply. He dreamed of having a sturdier home, shoes without holes, and packed lunches better than a slice of dried fish. One day, news spread that a strong typhoon was coming, and the whole village rushed to reinforce their roofs and tie down their plants. Neighbors began storing water because heavy rains and supply shortages were expected. While they were fixing their roof, they heard Lira shout, "Papa, the well is empty!" and a heavy worry sank into his chest. He didn't know how to gather water when he only had 30 pesos in his pocket. That night, harsh rain fell and wind slammed against their home as if trying to tear it down. Lira and Nico huddled in a corner while Petra tried to calm them even though her heart was pounding. A powerful gust hit their roof, breaking a part of it. In seconds, the rain poured straight onto the sack of rice, the rice he borrowed from Aling Indai and hoped would last 3 weeks. He tried covering it with an old tarp, shivering as the wind howled, but the storm easily tore the tarp away, leaving Mang Rado helpless as he watched water slowly fill the sack. He fell to his knees and cried, not because of the rice alone, but because he felt he had failed the family that depended on him. Petra held his shoulder and whispered, "The storm is not your fault," but it wasn't enough to ease the weight in his heart. The next morning, when the storm had passed, the smell of spoiled rice filled the house. The grains clumped together, some turning black, all no longer usable. Aling Indai should have been angry, but when she heard what happened, she immediately went to their home. "Rado, you don't have to pay for that rice. The storm wasn't your fault," she said. But Mang Rado shook his head firmly. "Indai, the rice was my responsibility, and a debt must be paid." Silence filled the room, because no one expected someone to be this honest in times like this. Even Aling Indai was moved. For the next 2 days, Mang Rado worked twice as hard. He helped neighbors fix their roofs for 100 pesos per day, and also cleared fallen trees on the road for extra pay. That night, after working, he sat before the jar he had been saving. He looked at Petra and gently but firmly said, "It's time to use this." When they opened the jar, coins saved over a year poured out. There were 5 pesos, 10 pesos, 20 pesos, even old bills no longer accepted in some stores. Petra counted them all, reaching 1,260 pesos, which to Rado was a treasure born from discipline and sacrifice. The next day, he brought the money to Aling Inday. She was confused when he handed her the pouch and said, "Inday, this is payment for the soaked rice." Aling Inday froze, unable to accept it. "I won't take that, Rado. The storm wasn't your fault." Mang Rado gently pushed the money back to her and said with unwavering sincerity, "But I made an agreement, and I won't teach my children that you can run away from responsibility when life gets hard." Tears filled Aling Inday's eyes, not because of the money, but because of the honesty she rarely saw in people nowadays. That afternoon, the whole village gathered as Aling Inday arrived with a full sack of rice, 2 boxes of canned goods, blankets, and household items from Mang Rado's family. It wasn't debt, it was a gift from her heart. She approached Petra and the children and said, "True goodness is not repaid with money. It is repaid with even greater kindness." Mang Rado was stunned and could barely believe what was happening. Petra and the children embraced him, grateful for a blessing they never expected. The next morning, the sunlight felt brighter, not because the weather was better, but because their hearts felt lighter. And that night, before sleeping, Mang Rado looked at the jar and began filling it with coins again. Not because they needed to pay anything, but because he wanted to continue the discipline and hope that led them to a new beginning. Honesty and discipline, even in small amounts, grow into trust and blessings that arrive at the right time. And kindness, when paired with a steadfast heart, returns in ways you never expect.